We welcome all viewers of the Freedom TV channel. Thank you for being with us. This is our time. Here are the top news stories at this hour. In the studio, Yuri Kulinik. Hello. This morning, Russian forces shelled a village of Molodezny in the Kherson region with artillery. A 16-year-old teenager was injured. He sustained wounds and injuries. The boy is currently in the hospital in moderate condition, according to the Kherson City Military Administration. A local woman also sought medical help for a concussion and mine blast injuries. According to preliminary estimates, more than 20 houses in the village were damaged by the Russian shelling. A 7-year-old girl was injured by Russian shelling in the Sumy region. Late last night, the Russians launched a missile at one of the villages in the Seredina community. The child was hospitalized. There is no threat to the girl's life, according to the Sumy Regional Military Administration. Another civilian from the Seredina community was also injured as a result of the missile strike. 24 out of 45 Russian drones that attacked Ukraine last night were neutralized by Ukrainian air defense, according to the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Russian army also launched 2 surface-to-air guided missiles at Ukraine. There were drone strikes at several locations. After talks in Berlin, the President of Ukraine is now holding a meeting in London. He has already begun negotiations with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Downing Street. We will tell you more about today's meetings, as well as the topics the leaders will discuss in our next news broadcasts. Ukraine must have reliable security guarantees to protect its territorial integrity under any agreement. This was stated by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer yesterday after an online meeting of European leaders and Presidents Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Donald Trump. Starmer emphasized that all discussions about borders, diplomacy, and ceasefires must be backed by guarantees. That is exactly why the coalition of the Resolute was created, to combine active diplomacy with military support for Ukraine and sanctions pressure on the Russian Federation.
It's important to remind our colleagues that we are also ready to increase pressure on Russia, especially on its economy, through sanctions and broader measures if necessary. You can already see the effect of these measures, and in the UK, we are preparing the next package of tough sanctions in this regard. That is why I believe it is important for all of us to continue working together with President Trump and President Zelenskyy for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed the unity of purpose among Western countries on the eve of the meeting between the U.S. President and the Russian dictator Putin. This was stated in a declaration released by the Italian government following talks between European leaders and the head of the White House, which took place the day before at the initiative of the German Chancellor. The Italian Prime Minister thanked Donald Trump for his efforts. She emphasized that it is important to continue cooperating with the United States in order to achieve peace, as this will ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security.
Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed great satisfaction with the unity of purpose and the ability to engage in dialogue that the West is demonstrating in the face of a fundamental challenge to security and the protection of international law. Now it is time to see what position Russia will take in Alaska, as so far it has not intended to make any significant moves forward. From the statement of the Italian government,
the coalition countries must be firmly prepared to deploy troops in Ukraine, says Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda. According to him, Vilnius can provide troops and military training facilities for the joint allied forces. Nausėda is also convinced that the issue of peace in Ukraine cannot be resolved without Ukraine. He emphasized that Volodymyr Zelenskyy must definitely participate in future meetings on peaceful settlement. One of the largest oil refineries in southern Russia caught fire as a result of a drone attack. The incident concerns the Volgograd oil refinery owned by Lukoil, according to local authorities. According to traders, just last year the plant processed more than 13 million tons of oil. Previously, the facility had already been hit by drones twice, on February 3rd and 15th. The plant is involved in supplying the Russian army. The United States has temporarily eased sanctions against Russia due to the upcoming summit in Alaska, according to the U.S. Treasury Department. Washington has authorized all sanction transactions necessary to organize the meeting in Anchorage. The restrictions are lifted until August 19th, inclusive. But the very next day, they will go back into effect. Let us recall that tomorrow in Alaska, a meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and the Russian dictator Putin is expected to take place at the Elmendorf-Richardson military base. It didn't even last 6 months. In Bryansk, Russia, the BMM automobile plant, which was supposed to produce analogs of Chinese vans, has halted production. This was reported by the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. The company produced only 110 vehicles, but even at a reduced price, selling them is difficult because the Russian car market has plunged into a deep crisis, experts note.
These vans were used for cargo transportation, but now they're not needed, even with discounts. All this is because what was once considered a stable segment is now suffering from stagnation in small business, high interest rates, a shortage of drivers, and a lack of demand. While the Russian authorities pretend that the war and sanctions are only benefiting Russia, in reality, the ongoing war is gradually destroying the Russian economy. From a report by the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
Meanwhile, the Russian economy itself is sinking deeper and deeper into crisis. For example, in July, the budget deficit of the Russian Federation grew to $15 billion, according to the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. This is a quarter more than the annual forecast of the Ministry of Finance. Sanctions against the aggressor country, falling profits from oil and gas exports, all of this is leading to a reduction in the revenue side of the Russian budget. Andrei Matrenko will continue on this topic.
Putin convened a meeting on economic issues with the Prime Minister, the head of the central bank, and the Ministers of Economic Development and Finance. They discussed preparations for the new federal budget. Putin claimed the budget was supposedly stable and even boasted about increased revenues from taxes on oil and gas companies. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Finance reported a record budget deficit. According to the Ministry of Finance, by the end of July it had reached almost 5 trillion rubles.
This is mainly due to accelerated spending in January of this year, as well as a decrease in oil and gas revenues. From a statement on the website of the Russian Ministry of Finance.
As for expenditures, in 2025 they increased by 21%, while revenues grew by only 3%. The backbone of the federal budget, profits from energy sales, fell by 19% over 7 months.
The decline in the industry's profitability is due to a combination of several factors: falling global oil prices, stricter tax requirements, and sanctions restrictions. These factors increase the risks to the sector's financial stability and force the Kremlin to look for new strategies to adapt to global economic challenges. From a publication by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service on Telegram.
In the original 2025 budget plan, the deficit was set at 0.5% of GDP. In June, the State Duma revised the budget, and the deficit level was tripled. It's unlikely they'll be able to stay within that limit either. According to Russian media, the Ministry of Finance is preparing for yet another increase in these figures. Analysts believe this is the Kremlin's only option. After all, Putin will never agree to cut spending on the military-industrial complex for the continuation of the war against Ukraine.
Even with 4 months left, it will be extremely difficult to shrink the deficit to the acceptable levels set in the revised budget. Neither social spending nor the increased utility payments in the public sector are subject to cuts. And hardly anyone would dare to leave the military-industrial complex without the required funding. So, at best, by the end of this year the deficit will be around 5.5 to 6 trillion. Maxim Blant, economic observer and columnist, in an original article for Radio Svoboda.
Most likely, the deficit will be covered at the expense of the ruble stability, experts explain. The first possible method is issuing federal bonds. This will bring some money into the budget, but it will also drive up inflation. The second is to lower the ruble's exchange rate, which Moscow has already greatly overvalued, and this will result in a record surge in prices, especially for consumer goods.
In other words, due to the devaluation, you could get more rubles for each oil dollar. But it's a double-edged sword. If you drop the exchange rate to around 110 rubles per dollar, then automatically, all prices in the country that actually depend on imports will rise by those 25%. Because right now, Russia is heavily dependent on imports, primarily from China.
In addition, hidden unemployment is rising in Russia, even though the official rate is at a historic low. Even the Kremlin dictator has admitted this. According to Putin, since the beginning of the year, the number of people sent on furlough or reduced working hours has grown to 200,000. Key automotive enterprises have announced a switch to a 4-day work week. Since August, KAMAZ and GAZ have moved to a 4-day schedule. Soon, Avtovezi will join them as well. At the end of July, the Lykinsky bus plant switched to a shortened work week. Pavlovsky has even halted production altogether. Starting October 1st, the country's largest cement producer, Semros, which manages 18 plants, will switch to a shortened work week. Employees of Russian railways have been put on unpaid leave until the end of the year. Andrei Dmitrenko for Freedom TV channel.